For you there. It's $100 for Powell River area residents and $200 for non-residents, and it includes lunch. So you'll have an opportunity to enroll in that after we speak tonight. I want to just take a moment to thank our sponsors. The people that provided the money for this weekend's events are not faceless corporations. We tried that route and it didn't work. So the people that provide funding for tonight are your friends and your neighbors. It all began when Jennifer Menard found a grant application opportunity from Vancouver Coastal Health for the Integrated Health Network. And when her boss, Nora Koros, found out, she thought that the Powell River branch of the BC Schizophrenia Society would do good things with some of that money. And we were invited to make a proposal. And ultimately, Vancouver Coastal Health agreed with her. And that's how it all began. Something that was just a faraway dream for us. We thought, wouldn't it be great if we could bring Dr. Amador to Powell River to teach us the LEAP method? And it happened. And so we want Nora and Jennifer to stand so that we can acknowledge their contribution and thank them for making this happen. Don't be shy, Nora. Don't be shy. Then we took our proposal to various community groups, and when the Rotary Club read it, they immediately and unanimously agreed to provide funding to us. And one of their members happens to be the publisher of the Powell River Peak, and she was motivated to do a 3-part series on mental illness this month, and we so appreciate her for opening conversation about something that's been in the shadows for so long. So if Joyce Carlson and any other members of the Rotary Club that are here tonight, would you stand so that we can express our thanks to you? Dr. Amador, she's also the one that found you those great babysitters. He brought his youngest son with him. So, then the Royal Canadian Legion read our proposal, and they provided funding to us as well. So if anyone from the Legion is here, we just want you to know how much we appreciate that, because it really made a difference. Then you all know that Pacific Coastal Airlines is a very generous supporter of our community and every community in which they serve. And we really want to show our appreciation to them. I don't think Daryl made it tonight. We wore him out this afternoon. But Doreen, if you would stand, and anyone else from Pacific Coastal, we want everybody to know who you are. So when plans were underway to bring Dr. Amador to Powell River, we got a phone call from Janssen Pharmaceuticals. And they said that they had been contacted by Dr. Amador, and he had suggested that they might want to help us. And we just thought, wow, how great is that? You have a world-renowned speaker who's sought after, and he not only agrees to come to our remote community to share his knowledge, he also helps us find funding to make it happen. So how great is that? And finally, I want to thank all of those businesses and individuals who participate in and donate to the silent auctions that are held at the annual jazz dinners that are orchestrated by Paul Cummings here at Brooks School. Proceeds from those auctions are being used to pay the remaining costs of tonight, and it really makes all the difference in the world of whether or not we could do this. So we thank you for that. And I want to just acknowledge some really key volunteers that make that happen every year. First, of course, is Doreen Smith, who does everything that you ask her to do, and she does it really well. So you can't ask for anybody better, and don't try to poach her for your organization, because she belongs to us. Although I think she serves about 10 other organizations anyway. And then is Loretta Cameron here? She has got silent auctions down to a science, and we couldn't do it without her. And then if others of you would stand as I call your names that have been really vitally important. Valerie Johnson joined us this year, if she's here. Judy Parkhouse, who is perfect every year, helps us out. Kathy Perot, who gets donations like nobody else can. Boy, did she teach me a thing or two. Please, thank you so much. So I'm running out of things to say. Can somebody get the people that have the ticket box so we can make that draw? Or maybe we'll just do it later because they must still be selling tickets at the door. I want to just take a moment now to introduce you to a Powell River resident who has been working tirelessly for the last 25 years on behalf of people with mental illness. Since 1987, Fred Daw has been involved with the BC Schizophrenia Society, first as a branch president, then as the provincial president, and ultimately as the president of the Canadian Schizophrenia Society. He's currently involved in the BC Alliance on Mental Health and Addiction Services, and also with the, he's just involved in too many things, Community Action Initiative, which is seeking to address mental health and substance abuse issues. And he continues to serve with Schizophrenia Society of Canada on their executive committee. As the parents of an adult son who was diagnosed with schizophrenia many years ago, Fred and his wife Barb have been offering hope and help to families who are dealing with mental illness for a very long time. So please join me in welcoming Fred Daw.
Good evening, folks. Great to be here. I think if we could get some of you sort of to move down, because Dr. Amador is not a scary person, you know. He's not going to jump at anybody in the audience. Could we fill up some of these rows in front a bit? No, we can't? Oh, okay. Well, I thought I'd try.
I would really appreciate it because I'm not just going to sit and talk to you. I'm going to be interacting with you. I promise not to touch anyone without asking. Over here in the first couple of rows, really help me out. Thank you. Can I have a chair?
I met Dr. Amador about 15 years ago, so you know, he's not really that scary. He was then, but yeah. Well, that's great, folks. I appreciate that. That sort of makes it look like we're happy and all together. I just want to say that it's really an honor and a pleasure to be asked to introduce Dr. Amador. And Maureen asked me, and I said, no problem. I'd really love to do it. And I showed Dr. Amador what I had here and I was going to speak to, and he said, oh my God, that's too much. But I think there's certain things in here that we really have to know about him, and he is an international sought-after speaker, clinical psychologist, professor at Columbia University Teachers College in New York, the founder and director of the LEAP Institute, and author of 8 books, including the national bestseller, I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help. Dr. Amador's expertise has made him a regular contributor to the Today Show and a featured guest on the ABC Good Morning America, Primetime Live, CBS This Morning, NBC Nightly News, 60 Minutes, CNN, Dateline, and many, many others. Dr. Amador has been a consultant to numerous companies and government agencies, including the National Institute of Health. His many forensic cases, including, for one, is the Unabomber. Dr. Amador has over 25 years' experience working with adults, families, and couples. He lives in New York. Previously, Dr. Amador was a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Columbia University, College of Physicians and Surgeons, on the board of directors of the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, NAMI, director of research at NAMI, and the director of psychology at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. In addition to his books, Dr. Amador has published over 100 peer-reviewed scientific papers and many other publications that have been translated into more than 20 languages. Dr. Amador was co-chair of the last text revision of the schizophrenia and related disorders section of the DSM-4-TR, often referred to as the Psychiatrist's Bible. Folks, join me in welcoming Dr. Amador.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, because they're also videotaping, so that they wanted to make sure the sound was working here. Anyway, what I was getting at was that I think the things that I hope are most relevant in terms of my experience is I've been on the front lines a lot, not only staying up until 4 in the morning talking with a mentally ill brother, but working on a nursing staff, an emergency room, with police departments, on the street with people in crisis. But I'm not going to go on and on about me. Let's get on to what we're talking about. How many of you in the room have ever heard somebody say, "I'm not sick, I don't need help"? Raise your hand. Look around the room, please. Keep your hands up. Now, this is a selected group, so this is not a scientific poll, but it's very common, right? You don't need a lot of research, even though I'll probably show you one slide. This is a very, very common problem we see in people with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. Certainly we see it in substance abuse, alcoholism, right? But how do you help somebody who doesn't understand, who doesn't believe they have a mental illness, accept treatment? That's going to be the main focus of what I want to talk about tonight. And it starts with relationships. That's the answer, and that's the problem. But we're going to try to stay solution focused rather than focus on the problem. But before we get there, let's define what are some of the difficulties, what are some of the obstacles that we face. This is a picture of my brother Henry that I just mentioned to you. Henry, when we immigrated from Cuba, we were born in Cuba, escaped after the Cuban Revolution. Henry, 8 years older than me, was like a father. He wasn't just a brother. He was somebody who really, really took care of me, took me under his wing. Our father had been killed in the Revolution. My mother had 4 children, was working all day. I was, like my poor son, it just occurred to me, I couldn't speak English. I only spoke Spanish, and I would be, sent off to other people who didn't speak a word of Spanish. Anyway, sorry, some people know that story. But if you can see from the picture, that's me driving the car. And I don't know if you can see Henry's face, but he was a very kind older brother who taught me many, many important lessons in life. He taught me the power of humility. He taught me the power of self-reflection. He was a very, very self-reflective person. And he was always there for me. When he became ill, back in really it was in the late 70s, early 80s, but his first psychotic episode, he became somebody I didn't recognize. Very, very angry, very frightened, paranoid, hearing voices, delusional. Our mother had laser beams coming out of her eyes. She was the devil. He was trying to show me burn marks that he got from her eyes. He really believed this. I tried desperately to get him into the hospital. How do you think I ultimately got him into the hospital? Let me first start by saying he gave us the title for this talk in the book that you mentioned. He told me, I'm not sick, I don't need help. So how did I get that guy? I was 21 at the time, he was 29. He had been ill really for 5 years in retrospect. But how did I get this guy who for 2 or 3 solid days kept saying, there's nothing wrong with me, leave me alone? How did I get him into a psychiatric emergency room? Police. Now, did you read my mind? Oh, you read the book. One of the two. People, I do speak all over the world. I've been to Europe 8 times in the last year and a half, New Zealand, Taiwan, I'm going back to the Netherlands. And you know what? I'm not saying this to impress you. There's nothing impressive about traveling. In fact, it's pretty exhausting. What's impressive is that I ask these same questions I'm going to ask you tonight, and we get the same answers. We are part of a global community of people who are dealing with the same issues. And let's talk about who we are for a moment. How many of us are someone like myself who has a family member with a serious mental illness? Could you raise your hand? Okay, look around the room, please, if you don't mind. Okay, how many of us are providers, mental health providers of one kind or another? A general practitioner, a nurse, a psychiatrist? There's only one psychiatrist here, right? Okay, quite a few of us. Anybody in law enforcement? Corrections? That's too bad. That's too bad. No one's fault, but I actually work a lot with law enforcement, and the people who end up coming to our trainings are really highly motivated. They understand that they're often the first line also. But we've all dealt with this problem, and I get the same answers to the questions I'm going to pose tonight, pretty much the same answers anywhere I go, which is actually reassuring. So I got my brother to the hospital by calling the police. I could not prevail on him to go on his own. He got to the hospital. He didn't talk to me for the first couple of weeks. Back then, in the early 80s, he was able to be in the hospital for a month in the US and refused to talk to me, and eventually started talking to me, refused medication, eventually started taking it, went to a family meeting, and Henry said, yes, I have schizophrenia, I'll take the Haldol. I promise. He gets discharged. Where do you think I found his bottle of Haldol? In the garbage. Again, you've read my mind. I mean, I've heard this everywhere I speak. It's such a common problem. Or some variations in the toilet, under the mattress, but thrown away, not used. It's a very, very common problem. I started arguing with him, first gently and then sometimes very vehemently and frustrated. You're sick. No, I'm not. You need the medication. No, I don't. The doctor told you. No, that was just then. I'm better now. I mean, familiar dance of, I'm right, you're wrong, back and forth, back and forth. So our relationship, the best picture I have of our relationship that I could think of is the cover of the book, the picture that we chose for the cover of the book, which is not much of a relationship, is it? Him walking away from me, him walking away from the mental health care providers who are trying to help him, walking away from taking any medicine for sure. What happened over 7 years is that my common sense approach, which was a loved one is ill, I got educated about it, I'm going to explain the illness to him and help and encourage him to take medicine, drove him away from me. It nearly destroyed our relationship. He got very paranoid about me. We argued all the time. I started to think he was an ass and stubborn and immature. This is the same guy I told you about in that first picture. Same guy who, I can't even tell you the number of things he did for our family. An incredibly mature, loving, kind person. And now I'm thinking he's just an immature, stubborn, in denial, SOB. How could you do this to our mother? How could you do this to us? Just accept it. And I began to learn different ways of speaking to him, and I began to learn what was really the beginning of the leap approach, which is not a therapy, it's not magic, it's not new. LEAP is simply 7 tools. 4 of the tools are in the acronym LEAP. There's 3 others. I'll give you an overview of them in just a little bit. But it's just more than just 7 communication tools. It's a big shift in thinking. And the big shift for me, because I was going through my training to become a psychologist during those 7 years when we were fighting so much, was I'm not winning. I can't convince him he's ill and to take medicine because he's ill. So stop telling him he's ill. Give up. You surrender and win. You ever hear that little slogan? Surrender and maybe you'll win. At the very least, I'll win my relationship back with him, which I did immediately. And what happened is our relationship transformed. In the years that I started using what was the beginning of the LEAP approach, this is what our relationship looked like. That's me with the Jerry Seinfeld haircut on the left, and that's Henry on the right. It's a very embarrassing photo. But you know what? I love that photo. And if I look at it long enough, I'll get very emotional because of the way he's holding me. We were very, very close. And we were blessed with, a good almost 18 years of being close. The first 7 years, he was in and out of the hospital about 4 to 5 times a year, over 30 hospitalizations, almost all of them involuntary. If they weren't involuntary, they were, I'm going to call the police if you don't go. That's not voluntary, that's a coerced treatment. He'd take his meds, he'd say he was ill, he'd come back out, and he'd disappear. He was homeless for a while. The last 18 years of his life, he was on a long-acting injectable medication, so I knew if he was taking his medicine or not in the hospital in those 18 years one time. And it was voluntary, really, truly voluntary. There's lots of details to that story. If you have questions about it, we can talk about them. But I want to give you what I think are some of the highlights. It wasn't just me, it was also one of the caseworkers and one of the doctors he was working with. Us working together to stop trying to convince him he was mentally ill and start listening to Henry. What did Henry want? What was important to him? So we're not unique if we've heard someone say to us, I'm not sick, I don't need help, and we're trying to get them to get help. And we see this, unfortunately, in the news. This is one of the consequences of what most people call denial of illness. One of the consequences is criminalization of people who have schizophrenia, schizoaffective, and bipolar disorder. They end up in our jails and prisons. In the United States, the Department of Justice estimates about half of our prisoners have symptoms of serious mental illness. Half. And there's been an explosion of the prison population over the last 25 years, coinciding with deinstitutionalization of people. A lot of you probably know this story. But this is Margaret Mary Ray. Does anybody remember who Margaret Mary Ray is? This woman right here? I don't know if any of you are David Letterman fans. Anyone a David Letterman fan? She was known as David Letterman's stalker. For years, I think it was 2 years actually, maybe not years, just 2 years, she would do things like break into his home, and he'd come home from the studio and she'd basically say, "Hi, honey," and he'd say, "Someone call 911." She was considered a stalker. She was arrested. She got jail time. She never got hospital time. She had a delusion that she was married to David Letterman. It was unshakable. It was a belief that was a consequence of her mental illness. She also did not understand that she was mentally ill. She eventually died from her illness. In her case, it was schizoaffective disorder, which is sort of a mix of bipolar and schizophrenia, right? When I say she died from her illness, what do you suppose I'm saying? Suicide. And I'd invite you to think about suicide that way in the context of serious mental illnesses. If at least my read of the research, something is definitely short-circuited in the brain where there really is no ability to feel like there's any hope and that the only answer is to end one's life. What's the suicide rate in schizophrenia? Anyone know? 25%? Not that high, no. 10%. 1 out of 10 people with schizophrenia will die from suicide. And I again invite you to think about talking about it that way. I don't like the phrase, the person committed suicide, because it sounds like it was a rational, logical decision made from made in the context of a brain that was working properly. Not to diminish any thought that somebody with mental illness has. People can be logical and reasonable. But suicide, again, I don't think people commit suicide. I think they die from suicide when it comes to mental illness. It's a little bit higher in bipolar disorder. So the mortality rate, let's talk about this as a medical disorder, which it is. The mortality rate in schizophrenia is 1 out of 10 patients die from the illness, simply from schizophrenia, from suicide. And there are other ways of dying. What's one of the biggest predictors of suicide? Not being in treatment. It's not the only predictor, but it's a big one. So it's one of the consequences of not being in treatment. Ted Kaczynski, it was mentioned that I worked on this case, the so-called Unabomber case. You know, Ted had has a loving family who desperately reached out to him, tried to get him to get help. Brilliant mathematician like John Nash, the Nobel laureate in the movie A Beautiful Mind, won the Nobel Prize for mathematics while psychotic. Both John Nash and Ted Kaczynski, brilliant mathematicians, both developed schizophrenia, but Ted isolated himself and was isolated and ended up moving to a cabin in Montana. And for those of you who have forgotten, was our first really major homegrown terrorist. Closed down in the United States the airline system for an entire day, long before 9/11. And that was because he was mailing bombs to airlines and to university professors. Ted never understood that he was mentally ill. In fact, he was facing the death penalty, and his lawyers wanted to present evidence of mental illness, and he said no. He refused to let them do that, even though he knew that would probably save his life. So, denial of illness impairs your common sense judgment about the need for treatment and services. Would you agree with me? Yes? Who agrees? Raise your hand. Anyone disagree? No. I disagree completely. If I walk over here and I take the perspective of the person with one of these illnesses we're talking about, it is common sense to refuse treatment. It's absurd for me to take an antipsychotic medication or a mood stabilizer if I don't have a problem. Isn't it? Let me put it a different way. Raise your hand if you did not have diabetes. Would you inject yourself with insulin? Raise your hand if you would do that. He wasn't listening. There's always one. Why are there no hands going up? Quickly. Why wouldn't you inject yourself with insulin if you didn't have diabetes? Because it could poison you. You ever hear that from somebody with schizophrenia or bipolar? The medicine's poison? Why else? Why wouldn't you inject yourself with insulin? Ask yourself that question right now. Because you don't need it. I'm not sick. It could poison me. It could kill you, actually. Right? Sound familiar? It's actually common sense. If we take the perspective of the person with the illness, it's common sense to refuse treatment. That's not how I felt about my brother. I thought he was being immature and stubborn and causing everybody unnecessary pain. In fact, I now know what he was doing was the best he could under an incredibly difficult set of circumstances where everybody he loved had turned against him. But are we dealing with denial? I don't think we are. I think what we're dealing with is anosognosia. How many of you, raise your hands if you've heard that term or read that term? Wonderful. Could you repeat it after me just once? 1, 2, 3. Anosognosia. Thank you. Wow, you're good, actually. The reason I do that is because people say, you know, I tried to talk with my loved one's doctor about that, and they can't say the word. This is a symptom that was first described by a Hungarian-born psychiatrist working with Babinski, who worked with Freud in France. And it was a description of patients after neurological insult to the brain who, for example, would be paralyzed on the left side of the body and completely unaware of that paralysis. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. And I am going to move towards some of the LEAP tools, by the way. I want to leave you with a couple of things you can take home with you and use. More than that, I hope to leave you with a shift in perspective. So speaking of a shift in perspective, let's talk for a moment. Let's not talk. Let's watch for a moment about this distinction in the title of the slide. The premise that I have here is that perception is far more important than reality.
Whose perception?
Good question. Whose perception? Let's watch My friend Peter. Whoops, that didn't work. Try that one more time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be back here, seeing so many familiar faces. And been looking forward to this, talking about lack of insight. It's all about perception, isn't it? It's all about how we see things. Now, for instance, I see this as the colours of the rainbow. You might see it like that too, but if your neighbour is colourblind, he or she probably will see something like this. It's the same picture, but we see it completely differently. Peter? Now, what's that? Sorry, could you wait for the questions? So this is similar about schizophrenia. How do we treat patients who perceive reality, who perceive themselves completely differently from the rest of us? How do we find a common ground with these people, and how do we work together towards adherence? Now that could be a question. Excuse me, as you can see, we're in the middle of the conference. I'd really appreciate if you came back later, if you sat down and wait with your questions. I promise to return to you. Now, what do we do? How do we create this common ground? Well, there are several things we could do. Look, it's really annoying. I'm trying to be very courteous to you, but I really ask you to step down, because it's not very interesting being up here when people like you come and spoil the whole thing. We've got a room full of people who paid to come here, so please be quiet. So, Dave, you have a question? Interesting question. I hadn't thought about that. I'll get back to that in the break, I think. On the 7th row, there was somebody who gave the lady a microphone. Yes, it's the lady in the green dress.
Was anybody surprised by that? No? Just keep that in mind as we go forward. Quick research. Back in 1989, when I started doing research on insight, really very little had been done. There were about 10 studies. Today, there are close to 300 research studies in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. This is just a couple of quick snapshots of some work we did back in 1989. This is part of the DSM-4 field trials. And this is published in the Archives of General Psychiatry 5 years later. The research was completed in 1990 actually. It takes a long time sometimes to publish research. What do we find? We asked patients who were first episode, and included in this group are people with 20, 30 years even of illness, all sorts of different courses of illness. Do you think you have a problem? Do you think you're ill? And the headline basically is that only 40% were aware of having an illness, and basically about 60% were moderately to severely unaware of having an illness. So back when there were about 10 studies, that was similar to what was found. But today I can tell you that, more than 200 replications of this main finding. And what you find is that essentially half of all people with schizophrenia, bipolar, and related illnesses not only don't understand they're ill, but that lack of awareness continues even when their symptoms improve. So this is more of a kind of almost like a negative symptom of schizophrenia that just continues. It can wax and wane, it can change a little bit, but continues over the years. And there have been 2-year follow-up studies, and we've looked at patients on and off of medication. We also looked at just awareness of signs and symptoms. The headline here is a lot of people with schizophrenia are not aware of the symptoms they have. So for example, this afternoon, somebody was talking to me, with me at lunch, and it wasn't about somebody with schizophrenia. I think it was bipolar disorder. But we found the same thing in the bipolar group in this sample, but had some negative symptoms. These are the 3 bars there. And one of the negative symptoms we look at is poor grooming and hygiene. And you can ask somebody who doesn't shower, who smells bad, who doesn't clean their clothes, do you think you have a problem with these things? And what we find is that about 40 to 50% of the people with this symptom don't know they have it. Completely unaware that they have it. And again, these problems with awareness continue over years and decades. They don't change with hospitalizations, with treatment, with education. So those are just some headlines. Other problems with insight, and this is really bizarre. There are patients who develop tardive dyskinesia. People who are on antipsychotic medications will sometimes develop movement disorders. So imagine if you had this kind of movement in your hand, or grimacing, right? And you didn't know it. Studies looking at people with schizophrenia who have tardive dyskinesia, have the movement disorder, find that about half don't know they have a movement disorder. Now what's that about? I was always trained this was denial. Well, why would you be in denial of a neurologically based movement disorder that was caused, by the way, by the medicines you don't think you need? I mean, if you're going to be aware of anything, you'd be aware of that, right? And this has been replicated over and over again, not just the 4 studies that I have up there. So what's the headline? Lots of problems with self-awareness in this particular realm. You develop an illness, you function differently, you perceive things differently, and roughly about half of the people who develop these illnesses also do not develop an awareness that something's wrong, and don't seem to be able to learn that their functioning has changed, that the hallucinations aren't real, that they can't function anymore in the way that they used to. Or even that they have a movement disorder. How many of you knew about that research? I'm curious. Just a couple of you. Does that surprise you? It's pretty strange. When I read it, I was like, wow, this does not sound like denial. This is something else. What's the problem with oral antipsychotic medications? Anyone? You don't have to take them.
They're easy to hide.
They're easy to hide. So the problem, I think, what you're saying is people don't take them, right? Well, how big a problem is this? Between 50 and 75% of people with schizophrenia have complete or partial non-adherence. Partial non-adherence is a big deal. If you're not taking a therapeutic dose, you're still going to be symptomatic and vulnerable to relapse and hospitalization and all the negative outcomes like suicide, like criminalization, breaking the law, or simply being holed up in your room doing nothing, right? And not functioning. I say to doctors all the time, within, if you look at this research, Keith and Kane, within 7 to 10 days of starting your patient on medication, you can, if your patient is representative of the patients in this study, in these studies actually, this is a review, expect that 1 out of 4 of your patients that you wrote those prescriptions for will not be taking the medicine. And that half will be off that medication after 1 year, and up to 3 out of 4 will be off after 2 years. So everybody asks me, what's the new best drug? And this got asked at lunch yesterday, and I have some answers about some of the very interesting and exciting new medications that are being developed. But the big problem is people are not taking their medication. So we're going to be talking about that. That's not the whole focus of LEAP. But it's one of the things we hope to accomplish when we build the relationship that LEAP is designed to build with the person who has mental illness. Let's talk about it in a positive way. And this is a study that looked at who takes their medication and takes it reliably. About 33% of people with schizophrenia. And this is just schizophrenia. The numbers are very similar in bipolar disorder as well, and schizoaffective disorder. So, adherence. By the way, this is kind of the more politically correct term. I actually like this term, so I don't mean that in a disparaging way. But in the medical literature, it's called compliance, right? You're all aware of that? Compliance with medication. So I'm really talking about compliance here. Well, awareness of being ill, having insight, is among the top 2 predictors of long-term, over years, taking your medication, taking all of it or nearly all of it, because sometimes people forget, right? What's the other top predictor? Especially, by the way, when you consider what I just talked to you about 5 minutes ago, that half of all people with these illnesses, and that's bipolar disorder as well, don't understand they're ill. What predicts what will get that person to take medication for those that do? Support. Okay. I was very supportive of my brother. I spent hours sitting on the edge of his bed. I'll never forget this. And he would be in his bed with a pillow over his ears. I found out later it was to help him not hear the voices. Being supportive, at first being gentle. It didn't do anything but drive him away from me. So, what else? He also had a roof over his head. He also had food. He had, doctor's appointments set up for him. He had a lot of support from not just me, from other family members. Any other ideas? What predicts who will take medicine and stay on it? The severity of the illness. No, not when you look at the research. You'd think that might be it, but no. Side effect profile. I thought for sure that was going to be the thing that really predicted. People who had bad experiences with side effects. As it turns out, if you don't think you're ill and everybody tells you to take the pill, what's the best argument you can make for not taking the pill? It gives me side effects. I hate them. Side effects are real. I'm not saying we should ignore them. We shouldn't take them seriously. And some of them are really, really significantly important and life-threatening even, some of them. But what we're hearing, and when you do the kind of research that we've been involved in for the last 20 years, and we get to talk to people with these illnesses and say, we're not going to tell your doctor, we're not going to tell your mother, we're not going to tell your father, what do you really think? Nah, the side effects don't bother me. And other people doing research, just looking at adherence, side effects don't even make it into the final four, top 4, top 5 factors. So what predicts who will be in treatment? Consequences or behavior? No, we got 500,000 people with serious mental illness in our jails and prisons in the U.S. Some severe consequences. Willingness. It's a little circular if you're willing. I'm not sure. What are you saying exactly?
If he or she's in agreement to take it?
If the person's in agreement, absolutely. But how do you get them there? What predicts that?
Acceptance.
Acceptance of what?
Of having an illness.
Having an illness. Now that was the first one. What's the second factor? And by the way, she's using a very interesting term. I used it with my brother. Why don't you just accept the fact that you have an illness?
Well, I mean in educating and the person
Okay.
becoming educated.
So becoming educated, they have an illness. Yeah.
In themselves.
It's not it.
Including relationships when you say support?
Relationships.
Or when you said support, do you mean just physical or do you mean relationship support?
We can broaden it. So relationships. But I had a relationship with my brother that was very loving at first. I mean, it didn't devolve into arguments for I don't know how long it took. It may have taken many, many months, actually. I remember being very kind and very humble. I mean, when he was first hospitalized because I called the police, I felt so guilty. I mean, I remember crying when I went to Keno Community Hospital and saw him on this ward with 38 other patients. And everybody was smoking back then. Everyone's pacing and smoking, and some people were mumbling, and I was scared. And he refused to talk to me for 3 weeks. We had a very good relationship still at that point. Didn't change a thing.
If the medication is meeting some other need
If the medication's meeting some other need that the person has, yeah. I believe that that's a valuable tool, and we'll talk about it, but that's not it. But you guys are on the right track. It is a relationship with somebody, but it's a particular kind of relationship with somebody that predicts who will take their medicine and take it for years. And I was telling this story previously, and I've told it before, with my brother Henry. My brother Henry never understood he was mentally ill. He never said, when I really pressed him and explored it with him, that he had schizophrenia. In fact, he said, no, I don't really think I have it. Why do you take your medicine? And he answered, well, because you, Mom and Pops, think I should take it.
Relationship with self.
Relationships with other people. And why did he take the medicine? Because I thought he should, and Mom and Pops were Betty and James. They ran the boarding care that he lived in. Because we had a particular kind of relationship with him. That's what I believe. This is what the research shows. and if you look at the research on therapeutic alliance and adherence, it's a relationship with someone who listens to you without judgment, who respects your point of view. So when the person says, I'm not sick, the medicine's poison, I don't want to take it, I don't contradict them, I don't try and convince them they're wrong. I not only listen, but I do something extra to convey that I respect their point of view. How do you do that?
Trust. Establishing trust.
Trust, I agree with you, completely validate, but those are concepts. What do you do practically? Let's think for. I don't usually do this way, but I'm curious what you think. What?
Listen to what they say.
So you listen to the person. That is definitely, passively listening is communicating respect because you've stopped and you've listened.
You feel for them, like they're, you know, it would be horrible to be, like it sucks to be you, right?
It sucks to be you.
You know what I mean? Like,
No, I know what you're saying, exactly. Let me paraphrase and tell me if I'm right.
yeah.
Express empathy for the experience, the emotional experience. Like saying things like, it must be really tough that everybody, including me, tells you you need to be on medicine. It must be very lonely. Expressing empathy, yeah. That's a way of connecting. I'm not sure that's directly respecting the person's point of view. It's implicitly, yes.
You research the drug and you find out exactly what the side effects are?
Not sure how that would help, talking about the side effects with respecting the point of view, although actually, I have done that. No, that would help. If the person's told me, I don't like taking the drug because blah, 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 and I say, you know, what you're telling me is the medicine is made you put on 35 pounds, and, right? Yeah, well, I can see why you don't want to take it. That's conveying respect, because you've listened and you've actively listened, you've reflected back, I really understand it, and I took it a step further in my example. I joined with the person and normalized it and said I'd feel the same way, right? That's one way of conveying respect. Thank you. We'll come back to that, but keep this in mind. This is really the goal of everything I'm going to talk about for the rest of our time together. It's to create this relationship. You do not win the battle over getting somebody to accept help. And whether that help is seeing a therapist, taking medicine, accepting a community-based treatment team, or a case manager, or supervised housing, right? You do not win convincing someone to accept any of those things on the strength of your argument. I tried that. I've tried it with many patients. I tried it with my brother for 7 years. Where I've won is on the strength of my relationship. And when the relationship looks like this, the person really genuinely feels I'm interested in what they have to say, I respect their point of view, and they know, I do think, you ought to try the medicine, or accept the supervised housing, or accept the case manager. They know I have that opinion, that they'd benefit from treatment or services. So what causes poor insight? A lot of research on these two areas does not explain what we're seeing. And I'm not going to get into the details. We can talk about it later if you're interested. What does explain it are neuropsychological deficits, in particular the frontal lobes. There's been so much research on this now, since starting in 1991, that it made it into the DSM-4. When Michael Flaum and I were asked to co-chair this revision of the DSM text, we were asked to make it scientific. What does that mean? Make it reflect the science. So we assembled a group of experts in the field from around the world to review the text and rewrite it, and then come up with a consensus. That then went to another group above us who checked the literature. We didn't just send the paragraph I'm going to show you on its own. We sent it along with something like 60 empirical research studies attached to it, so that these experts could look at the actual data, the research, and see if it supported the text. Here is the scientific consensus as of 1999. This is not just Javier's opinion and Michael's opinion. This is an opinion of a group that I've just described, and the people who oversaw our efforts. This is, by the way, on page 304. Everybody uses this in Canada. Everybody uses this in the US and in most countries around the world, the DSM, for making psychiatric diagnoses, or the ICD. But many use the DSM. A majority of individuals with schizophrenia have poor insight regarding the fact that they have a psychotic illness. Evidence suggests that poor insight is a manifestation of the illness, right? Rather than a coping strategy. And it may be comparable to the lack of awareness of neurological deficits seen in stroke, termed what? Thank you for playing with me on that one. This symptom, look what I got away with. That's how I felt. It's like, I was just like, yes, when the group came back. Because I saw this, by the time we did this work, I had been convinced for 5 years this was a symptom. When someone says, I'm not sick, I don't need help, leave me alone. You're the crazy one, not me. All those statements, I really felt were just manifestations of a symptom. This symptom has predisposes the individual to noncompliance with treatment. We've covered that. And it's predictive of higher relapse rates, increased involuntary hospitalizations, a poor psychosocial functioning, and that means not only work, school, but also just the quality of relationships with people. And a poor course of illness, and that again has been measured in a lot of different ways. So it's a really important symptom for us to pay attention to. Let's talk about anosognosia. I've been talking about anosognosia and neurological disorders and throwing the word around a little bit. First person I ever evaluated with anosognosia had really the classic damage to his brain in the non-dominant hemisphere parietal lobe, but also frontal lobes. There were some lesions. It was following stroke, and some bleeds. And we know that the frontal lobes are dysfunctional in many people with schizophrenia and related illnesses. I asked this man, this is a neurological patient though, I was working for a year on a neurology service. I asked him, can you move your left arm? Because I'm going to now evaluate what? Not his denial, his anosognosia. I'm going to evaluate another symptom of his syndrome. He said, sure, I can move my arm. He can't move it. It doesn't move. I asked him what happened, and he said, I moved it. So I said, well, you weren't looking. Would you look at your arm with me? So he turned his head. He looked at his arm. He tried to move it. Of course, he can't. And I asked him what happened, and he hemmed and hawed and said, you know, I don't really feel like it. I then pleaded with him. I said, you know, I'm an extern. I need this for my grade. I was fascinated. I really actually couldn't believe that, you know, he was, no pun intended, I thought he was pulling my leg. It was like, come on. Even though I understood it, I'd never seen it. And until you've seen it, it's really a remarkable thing. I asked him to move his arm a third time. He said, okay, I'll do it. I said, please, just one more time, because he didn't want to do it. I had to plead with him. He was getting anxious. Couldn't move his arm. He was looking. I asked him what happened, and he was really anxious and reticent and didn't want to tell me, and I finally convinced him, please just tell me why you didn't move your arm, or why didn't it move? And he said, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I think you did something to my arm. He had an IV in still. He said he thought that we had dripped something into his IV that paralyzed his arm, or it had been tied down in some way. Right? Which is getting a little paranoid, right? So this is a very, very severe lack of awareness, and the belief that nothing is wrong, that he can still move his arm, doesn't have a deficit, persists despite the evidence, right? Didn't I give him evidence 3 times that he can't move his arm? And it's associated with what are called confabulations. These are these theological explanations to explain away what he's seeing with his eyes. He can't move his arm, and what he knows to be true in his head. I can move my arm. Right? What were his confabulations? Anyone? That had done something was the most bizarre one. I'd either paralyzed his arm or tied it down. What were his other 2? I don't want to. That was the one that really struck me, because my brother Henry, I'll never forget, I must have spent so many times sitting at the edge of his bed, because I keep bringing this up tonight, but sitting at the edge of his bed talking to him, trying to get him to come out of his room. He had such a loss of motivation. And I said, Henry, and the analogy is, it's like I'm trying to show the paralyzed man that he's paralyzed. I'm trying to show my brother he's got a mental illness. Henry, you haven't worked in years. You used to always have friends and girlfriends. You haven't talked to anybody, you haven't had a girlfriend in 3 or 4 years. You were in college, you dropped out. You loved school. Doesn't that tell you something's wrong? And you know what he said to me? I don't really feel like it. I'm much more interested in my philosophy. And he had these notebooks with really rambling philosophical theories that he was writing. But I think today that was a confabulation. I don't think he understood why he wasn't doing the things he used to love to do and was able to do, work and love. What we all want, right? Meaningful work and loving relationships. He was unable to do the things he used to be able to do. Answer he came up with was, I don't feel like it, right? So I want to bring this to life. I need a volunteer. You don't have to come up here with me. And somebody who's married. And you don't have to be happily married. That's not a problem. It's okay. Just married. Just raise your hand from where you are, please. And I can see wedding rings, so I'll pick someone if I don't. You going to volunteer?
I'm married.
Do you know what I'm going to do?
No.
Okay. Would you mind standing? Just for a moment, just right where you are. And I'm going to come down next to you if that's all
I have a
right.
wedding.
Okay. Could you tell everybody what your name is?
Joyce.
Joyce. Joyce. And let's step over here into the light, if you don't mind. And so I have room. Okay, good. And who is it that you say you're married to?
Dawn.
Okay, and how long do you believe you've been married to Dawn?
I believe I've been married to Dawn for almost 48 years.
Okay, about 48 years. And do you have kids together?
Yes, they're his.
Okay, how many?
2.
So he has 2 kids, and you believe you've been married to Dawn for 48 years?
Yes.
Okay. What did you say your name was again?
Joyce.
Joyce, I'm sorry, I'm jet-lagged. Joyce, I knew that was your name. And the fact is, even if somebody else had volunteered, I was going to pick you. Danita had asked me to pick the woman in the purple sweater. There you are. And actually, if we could not laugh for a second, and I'm really sorry to take people's time with this right now, but Joyce isn't actually married to Don, and Danita, I think you have the restraining orders that the magistrates have signed. I can prove it to any of you, and I can certainly prove it to you, the legal documentation. I suspect that's not going to make any difference because you're certain you're married to Don, right?
I believe that to be true.
You believe that to be true. Okay. Well, I can show you legal documents, restraining orders, signed by Don and his wife, the mother of his kids that he's been living with for the last 42 years. Can we not laugh, please? I'm serious. I mean, if you need to laugh, that's fine. I'm just asking people here because they don't understand what's going on. You can call Don right now if you want, and he agreed to talk to you one last time before he calls the police, but because he will call the police because of the restraining orders. Would you like to call him?
No.
That's interesting. So you don't want to call him?
No.
Why?
I have no answer.
Okay, well, I can tell you now, if she called Don, he would tell her, I'm going to speak to you this one time. I understand that there's a doctor there that specializes in people who have the problem you have. And there's lots of doctors in the audience. And the good news is we have a psychiatric hospitalization. We have a bed available for you in the hospital anyway. And we can get you some help. Okay, because nobody wants to see you go to jail. So will you go?
No.
What were you thinking about?
I don't want to go to the hospital.
Why?
Because there's nothing wrong with me.
Okay, I want you to really feel this for a second. Because I'm being serious. You're not married to Don. You're really not. I can prove it to you. Who's your best friend that you could talk to? Who's the person you trust most in the world other than Don?
Don.
Other than Don?
Only Don.
Only Don. Is there anybody in this room that you trust?
Well, I used to trust him. I don't trust, okay, Anne.
Who?
Anne.
Anne, could you please confirm for me to Joyce that she's not married to Don and that you two are concerned?
It's true, you're not married to Don.
It's true you're not married to Don, she just said. And I'm really sorry about taking everybody's time with this. We're going to wrap this up very quickly because I understand that we have some help outside if you won't leave. We're not going to continue with you in the room. Okay?
Okay.
So we're going to ask you to leave, and it's a kind of a tough love thing, I'm sorry. But we really don't think you should be here after hearing this message, and we think you need to go and consider getting help. Okay? What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? Because you really can't stay. You can take your coat, but you're going to have to go.
All right.
Where are you going to go, can I ask?
I have no idea.
Tell me honestly, Joyce, where are you going to go when you leave here?
I don't know.
Aren't you married to Don?
Oh, I'll go home.
Okay, she'll go home. Okay. You're thinking I'm being trickier than I'm being. I'm actually trying to see what you would actually do, right? So you go home to Don. What happens when she goes to his house? He calls the police. The police come. What do you say to them?
Why are you here?
Why are you here? Ma'am, there's a restraining order against you. You are not married to this man. This has happened before. We see that we've been to this house before. You're going to need to come with us. Now, you can go to a hospital if you like. We understand that there's some help for you. Would you like to go to the hospital, or do you want us to take you to jail?
Tough choice. Okay, I'll go to the hospital.
Okay, so she goes to the hospital. They admit her with a psychotic disorder. They offer her medications. Do you take the medicines?
No, because there's nothing wrong with her.
No, because there's nothing wrong with her. That's not a problem, Joyce, but we can't keep you here forever. And we're going to have to let the judge know, because there is a charge pending against you because of violation of the restraining order. Are you sure you don't want to take the medicine? We really would hate to have the police come and rearrest you.
Okay, I'll take the medicine.
So she takes the medicine. We offer you some housing. Let's fast forward a month. And a prescription. What do you think you might say?
I'm in the housing now, right?
You're in the hospital.
Oh, I'm in the hospital.
I'd like to discharge you. I'm your doctor.
All right.
Joyce, we've got some supervised housing for you. There's 4 other people with schizophrenia like you that live there. And I'd really like to discharge you. Are you okay with that?
Yes.
You going to follow through?
Yes.
That's really wonderful. I really hope never to see you here again. I sign the discharge papers. I send her out the door. Where do you go?
To Dawn's house.
She goes back to Don's house. Sound like Margaret?
My house.
Margaret.
My house.
My house. Beautiful. Thank you. Now you're really in it with me. Thank you. It's hard to get there. Like Margaret Mary Ray with David Letterman. No different. All right. Thank you. Let's thank Joyce. So, Joyce, let me ask, you're not off the hook completely though, but is there anything I could do? Let's say 5 years go by. Do you think it's possible you'd learn not to go back to Don's house, your house? And you call your kids, his kids, and they all say, Joyce, you seem like such a nice woman. Our father and our mother are just heartbroken about this. Please get help. That's what you hear from them. Would that convince you you're not married to Don? No. Would anything convince you? No. That's the nature of anosognosia for mental illness. This is not a pliable belief, folks. You're not going to convince the person. Why can I say this with such certainty? Because I've interviewed literally probably a couple of thousand people in our research. And I get to say to them, I get honest answers. I'm not your doctor, I'm not your nurse, I'm not your father, I'm not your brother. No one will know, because you're not even a name on this form. Look, you're a code. 3210A. Do you really think you're ill? Nah. We go to the medical chart, patient has developed insight, will be discharged tomorrow. Revolving door patients, you ever heard that term? Frequent flyer patients? My brother was referred to as revolving door patient. Because like Joyce, who will become a revolving door patient until she learns to stop going to Don's house. And what an incredibly lonely place to be. Anybody that you want to talk to about what happened is labeling your problem as a delusion that you need to take medicine for. I know we were just doing a role play, but did you have any emotion about it? Any feeling?
Anxious.
Anxious. Okay, about what? About being in front of people or about what was happening? About what was happening. And anxious in what way? About what?
Oh, because you didn't believe me.
Because I didn't believe you. Nobody believed you. Including a judge, including the police, including Don, including the 4 kids that... 2 kids, I'm sorry. I've got 3, so I think everybody's got a bunch now. Nobody believes you. It's an incredibly lonely place to be. And what happens is, Joyce, we find out, is a pretty good liar. She's willing to lie to doctors and other people to get what?
What she wants.
What she wants, her freedom. It's not just what she wants. I want chocolate right now. I appreciate your comment. I just want you to amplify it. It's not just what she wants, it's her freedom. It's the dignity of having freedom. You're mentally ill and you shouldn't be sitting in that chair and you need to be in a hospital. I'll say whatever it takes to get my freedom back and my dignity back, right? I used to be angry with my brother because he would lie to us in these family meetings back when we used to have them. I don't know if you have them here, but we don't in the States anymore because we just do drive-through treatments, you know. I make the joke, but it's really sad and dangerous. And I would say, why did you lie to us? And boy, I wish I could take those words back. I did actually, because later I apologized and said, Henry, I know why you lied. I would have lied too. I would have lied too. Somebody had a comment?
Is that lying or complying?
Complying and not telling the truth, yeah. I think you're making a very good point. It's complying, but it's lying.
Like an intentional...
Yeah, he's intentionally saying, yes, I'm sick, yes, I'll take the medicine, all the while knowing the person won't. Because they want their freedom back. They want, to not be forced to take medicine. Because once I'm out of the hospital, no one can force me, right? So when dealing with anosognosia, the doctor knows best approach isn't going to work very well with Joyce, is it? Right? Because there's no collaboration. She's not my patient. Or if she's a loved one, she's not on the same, planet as me. I think she's mentally ill and she knows she's not. Something bizarre is going on. Were you feeling angry at all? I'm curious. In the role play?
A little bit, yeah.
Starting to feel a little bit angry. That's what people tell me. Anxious, scared, angry. Does this sound familiar? All right. And it's because of the relationship. It's not because of the illness. It's because of how I'm responding to your anosognosia. We can't. So when dealing with anosognosia for mental illness, when we can get somebody in treatment, I've for many years talked about long-acting therapies. I don't like to use the term long-acting injectables anymore because it puts the emphasis on the way the drug is given. Why? That's not what's unique about them. What's unique about them is they're long-acting. And that when you give somebody one of these medications, you know they've gotten it. When my brother missed his appointments for he had the first generation antipsychotic long-acting therapy, I got a call from the nurse because I had his permission to get called. And so she'd say, hey, Henry didn't show up. So I would call Henry up and we'd talk about it. And I was sending him $5 a day. That was one of the things. But that was not the real reason he went back. It was because I was concerned. And I would just talk to him, how you doing? How have you been? What's going on? Hey, by the way, I heard from Cheryl that you didn't come for your appointment. You okay? Yeah, I'm all right. Are you going to go? I don't know. I don't really want to go. Can I tell you what I would like? And he'd laugh. He'd say, I know what you want. And I said, well, could you do it for me? And then he would do it. And sometimes I'd have to go further and say, I can't send you the money tomorrow if you're not going to do it. Just one of the things we had worked out, which was not easy. Because he's 8 years older than me and he was a father to me. It was very difficult thing to set up with him, that $5 a day. You know, it really, really demoralized him at first when I told him, you take your medication, I'll give you the money. But we got through it. This is just some data, but basically it's pretty intuitive. If someone's on a long-acting therapy, whether it's once every 2 weeks or once a month, you know with 100% certainty they're on it or they're not. In the book, I talk about Millie. Millie was somebody with schizophrenia, flew to visit her daughter in LA, promised her daughter she'd let her watch her take her pills every day. And while she was on the plane, Susan discovered later, her daughter Susan, Millie had taken all the medicine out of the cabs and emptied them. Very smart. I'd do it. I wanted to see my daughter, who I loved, and my daughter thought I was sick. She'd been brainwashed by all those psychiatrists. So that's what my brother said about me. And Susan eventually figured it out. But how do you get somebody to take any kind of medication, much less a long-acting therapy? Motivational interviewing and related techniques. This is just one review article looking at interventions to improve medication adherence. And again, this is focused primarily on schizophrenia, but it generalizes because there's other research on bipolar, not as much, though. They reviewed studies spanning 20 years and looked at programs that appeared to improve adherence to medication. What did they find? That interventions and family therapy programs relying on psychoeducation were common in clinical practice, but they were typically ineffective in improving medication adherence. Now, I'm a big believer in psychoeducation, but not for people like Joyce, at least not at first. What do you think my brother said to me when he came back from his first psychoeducation group? Well, I'll tell you what he said first. He said, I'm not going back there. And what do you think the reason was? How did you all read my mind again? What'd you say?
I'm not like those other
I'm not like those other people. They're all crazy. They're all mentally ill. We all share this common experience, folks, right? But let's put ourselves into the shoes of the people we're trying to help. Would you want to be sitting in a room? Would that help you to sit in a room with a bunch of people with schizophrenia and bipolar and schizoaffective disorder when what you want is what? At the very least, to stay out of the hospital. At the very least, not have the police in your life. And really what you want is to get your husband back and your family back and your home back, right? That's what she wants. Motivational techniques were common features of those programs that actually improved medication adherence, that actually helped people with schizophrenia. 20 years of studies. So this has been in the research for a long time. Let's talk about LEAP now. And it is a form of motivational interviewing, but it was developed first with Aaron T. Beck. For those of you who know Dr. Beck, he's the person who created cognitive therapy. And Dr. Beck and I had a grant from NARSAD to develop an inpatient, just a 6-session intervention. And what I discovered very quickly was that this didn't need to be a therapy, and that the people who were the least educated were the ones who learned how to do it most quickly and easily. We had a 20-year-old volunteer, and then we had doctors, nurses, psychologists, and the 20-year-old volunteer learned the predecessor of LEAP. It was called MATE, Medication Adherence and Insight Therapy. She learned it really quickly because she didn't have to unlearn bad habits. So, let's talk very briefly about where I'm coming from. I am not reinventing the wheel. LEAP is not new. People have been talking about the power of listening for thousands of years, the power to transform relationships, in sales, to sell people on things, in couples therapy, to diffuse anger and tension, in crisis work with police officers, to de-escalate, right? Listen to the person first. So there's nothing particularly unique about it. But the package of tools really came out of our experience working with people like my brother Henry. And I want you to think about the tools you have. when you're working with somebody with a mental illness. And I was using the medical model tools. And let me back up. When I was 5 years old, this is the analogy I use that helps me remember to use LEAP, because I still forget to use it sometimes, believe it or not, and I mean that. When I was 5 years old, I wanted to be Batman for Halloween, because the really, really cool thing about Batman is that he wasn't supernatural. He didn't come from the planet Krypton. He didn't shoot spider webs, because he was, what was his deal? It was radiation or something, changed him. He was just a regular person who had a very cool bat utility belt, right? With really, he had cool tools on his belt. And one of them was this grappling hook thing. It was like dental floss thin, and he could climb over any building with that thing. And I really wanted to be that guy. So I want you to imagine, it doesn't have to be a bat utility belt because that's nerdy, but imagine a tool belt. Now on one side you have all the tools that you've walked into this room with, all the tools, if you're a doctor, you learned in medical school, all the tools I learned in my training, medical model tools. You do your research, you do a good psychosocial history on the person. You, in your head or literally, refer to your diagnostic manual, you make a diagnosis, you make a prognosis, you give a prescription, recommendations, follow up, etc. Wonderful tools. They help hundreds of millions of people every day with psychiatric disorders. But half of the people we're trying to help don't believe they're ill. So when I use those tools with Joyce and someone like Joyce, what happens? You've got a mental illness. She's gone already. From that moment that I used the medical model side of my tool belt, I've lost her. So just think of a tool belt, and on the other side you've got these open loops and hooks ready for some new tools. And let's just give you a brief introduction in the brief time we have left to some of the tools to give you a feel for how LEAP is different than the medical model tools. And I use these every day, and you can mix and match these up as you need to. But if there's one guiding principle, when dealing with somebody who after months or years tells you, or you suspect, that they believe they're not ill, stop trying to convince them they're ill. Stop trying to help them accept that they're ill. Because when I was thinking that somebody needed to accept that they were ill, what I was thinking was that deep down inside they knew they were ill, they just hadn't accepted it yet. Right? So that I'm still working on the coping strategy, denial concept, and it's not. I never once told my brother, stop hallucinating, Henry. Would you just cut it out? It's really, really destroying our mother. Why didn't I do that? It's a symptom, and he couldn't control it. But I did tell him, stop saying you're not ill and take your medicine. Admit that you're ill. It's destroying our mother. It's the same thing. Right? So first, as we go into this, if you can just, and if you're reluctant to give up that goal of convincing your patient or your loved one that they're mentally ill, just ask yourself the question, how long have I been trying and have I succeeded? I see you've been shaking your heads adamantly. Can I ask you how long you've been trying with the person you're thinking of?
Well, this is a friend that
A friend.
back in Alberta.
Yeah. How long have you been trying?
Well, I tried for quite a few years.
Quite a few years, and it didn't work. So why not try something different, right? It's really pragmatic. I'm not preaching. I'm just saying, think about some other ways of doing things. So I'm going to skip over this research. If you want to look at it, it is on leapinstitute.org. But basically, well, I'm going to skip over it completely because I want to get to the first LEAP communication tool or strategy, reflective listening. Reflective or active listening involves making sure you have the time for it, which I'm doing right now. Letting the person know that you heard what they've had to say, right? So it's listening without interrupting, and then reflecting back in my own words what I heard the person say. For what purpose? Why would I do that? Validation. Fill me in. What does that mean?
Making sure that what you think you heard is what the person wants you to hear.
Fantastic. That What I think I heard is in fact, I'm adding in fact, what the person wanted me to hear. That I got it right. That's all reflective listening is. A, I want to hear what's going on, and I want to see if I got it right. That's B. It's a way of communicating respect for the person's point of view. Remember that earlier slide I asked you to remember? The relationship we're trying to build. So let's quickly do a role play. You don't have to get up. Anyone. I'm going to role play a patient. We're going to do a few of you. All I want you to do, it's a simple task, isn't it? Just reflect back what I've just said, what my patient said. Okay? Ready? Who wants to start? What's your name?
Annabelle.
Annabelle. And speak really loud and I'll repeat what you say. This is a real patient of mine. Okay. Annabelle, you say you want to help me, then understand something. I'm not mentally ill. I don't need these goddamn medicines. What I need help with are the people upstairs who are flushing the toilet. And they're communicating with everybody when they flush those toilets, with all those people who are trying to kill me.
Oh, wow, I really hear that there's something going on upstairs that's really, really bothering you, and that you don't really think that any of the medication is really what you need. You just need help with upstairs.
Okay, pretty good, actually, right? Did you hear her? Okay. But it was interesting. You made one of the most common mistakes, thank you, which is omitting really two of the most important things that he said, that he wanted me to know. Anyone? What did she omit? What?
Flushing the, getting the...
That wasn't really important, but she did omit that delusion of reference, that the toilet flushing was a communication device. What else did she omit? What?
Nothing wrong.
I'm not mentally ill.
Right.
Right? Let's do it again, just to give other people a chance. Anyone else? Someone else. It's not that hard. Come on, thank you. And I'm not that mean. What's your name? Susan. I'm going to do this without emotion now to make it easier to remember it all. Susan, you say you want to help me, then please understand I'm not mentally ill. I don't need these damn medicines. What I need help with are the people upstairs who are flushing the toilet to communicate with the people who are trying to kill me.
Right. So you're telling me you're not mentally ill and you don't need the medicines. You're just people upstairs who are doing some things that are annoying you.
Okay.
They're getting in your way.
Okay, stop there. Very good beginning, right? How do you think you did?
Yeah, I think I didn't use your language after the first two sentences.
My language is much more than my language you didn't use. Anyone want to help her out? What?
Avoided the communication.
She avoided. You omitted. Again, you're omitting.
Because we're judging, right? Like we don't believe it.
But she omitted. Well, it's interesting. Yes. Yeah. There's also another thing. She's reacting a little bit of reality testing. How did she do that? Boy, that's a very subtle comment you're making. Subtle observation. Omitting big things like the person said I'm not sick are obvious. But you actually omitted the fact that people were trying to kill me, even though you talked about it. That was pretty tricky. What you did is very, very, very common is that people are annoying you and bothering you. I never said that.
Yeah.
People who are trying to assassinate me are not annoying me and bothering me. They're trying to assassinate me. Right? I mean, if this was my patient, he would have yelled at you at that point. Because he was so agitated at that moment. And this was in an ER, and he really needed someone to hear him.
So I have a question. So do I reflect his reality back to him even though I don't believe in it?
Even though you don't believe it. Absolutely. Reflect it straight back. Sounds hard to do. It is at first. I'm going to give you 2 quick tools so you can do it. But it's not so easy, is it? Someone else. Let's do it again. We've gone through it 3 times now? 2 times. Someone else. Quickly. Where? Okay, what's your name? Jen, you want to help me? Please understand, I'm not mentally ill. I don't need these damn medicines. I need help with the people who are upstairs flushing the toilet and communicating with the people who are trying to kill me.
Okay, so you're telling me you don't think you're sick? That you just...
I didn't say I don't think I'm sick. Okay. I'm not sick.
Okay, you're telling me...
Fuck you. Sorry, I'm a method actor. I'm really sorry, I don't usually do that, but I was feeling, I'm jet lagged, and I was, I'll make any excuse, I'm on Oxycontin. No, I'm not. I actually was really feeling him. He would have just been furious.
Yeah, I said that wrong, but I knew it.
No, it's okay though, but I'm glad you said it because you reacted. When you say, you think, you believe, you feel this is happening, you're drawing a line in the sand and you're saying, you're on that side, not me. It's subtle. Well, do you believe me? I believe you believe it. I love that one. I said that one for years. And if you really pay attention to how someone responds to that, it's a sinking look. Joyce asked me, so do you believe I'm married? Well, I believe you believe it. How would you feel? Mad at me. Mad or really depressed is what I see. Want to try again? Try it again. Jen, let's do it. You're great. But see, do you remember what I said? The senior people in our study with Dr. Beck couldn't get the interventions. It was the 20-year-old who had no training, no experience, no mentally ill loved one, right, who got it right away. It's hard to unlearn these tools. Let's try one more time. This is the 5th time I'm going through it. And by the way, for those of you who want to argue that, well, it's complicated, there's so many elements, there's only 5 elements, 3 of which were the most important. You know the limits of short-term memory, right? 7. That's why phone numbers are broken into usually 3 to 4, 7. So, 5 elements. Here we go. I'm not sick. You want to help me? Understand, I'm not sick. I don't need these damn medicines. You can help me with the people upstairs who are flushing the toilet to communicate with those people who are trying to kill me.
Okay. Let me get this straight. You're telling me you're not sick? So I understand. You're saying you're not sick. Sorry.
I want them to hear you. Go ahead.
So let me get this straight. You're not sick. You're feeling, it sounds like...
I didn't say I'm I'm saving you, even though you didn't go.
Yeah,
go ahead.
thank you. Now I'm really nervous.
Don't be.
You're telling me, okay, let me get this straight. You're not sick. You don't need any medication. What you would like is somebody to deal with the people upstairs who are flushing the toilet. And that because you're worried that somebody is trying to kill you. You're worried, fear, don't use emotion.
But brilliant. That was really good, actually. That was really good. Seriously. You know, I like that you caught worried. I wasn't even going to give you a hard time for worried. But that is a way of omitting the certainty and severity of the situation.
Yeah. So you don't use, do you reflect emotion at all?
You can. I teach reflective listening separate from empathy because the 3 big mistakes people make is they omit things, and you omitted something very important. I want to come back. I want to end with that. Okay? Very important, even though you did a beautiful job of getting the 5 elements. And I'll tell you what they are in a second. The other thing is they react by saying things like, it's a form of reality testing. You think, you feel, you believe this is happening. Or sometimes people will say, well, I'd like to help you with that. Tell me more. That's a reaction. That's not reflective listening. Right? And then the 3rd common mistake is rushing to empathy. We're much more comfortable saying, boy, you sound like it must be really terrifying for you. Because that's safe. Because we don't have to get into all those problems that reflective listening creates for us. Right? So rushing to empathy, yes, you mix reflective listening with empathy, but I teach them really, really, really separately, a big wall between them, because most people are afraid, don't know, haven't practiced reflective listening, for reasons I'm going to delineate in a second. What's the big thing she omitted? The first common mistake, omissions, reactions, rushing to empathy. What did she omit? It's subtle, but boy, he would have just jumped on you.
The communication.
You want help with. No, I don't want help with. I want your help. Think about what I said. Let me tell you what I said to him. Javier, I'll use my own as if it was me. Javier, if I understand you, slow down, please, for a moment, because it's important. I really want to understand you. You're not mentally ill. You'd like my help. My help, not someone else's. You'd like my help. You don't need these damn medicines. I might say damn medicines, because it was so emphatic. What you need help with are the people upstairs who are flushing the toilet, right? And they're communicating with people who are trying to kill you. Is that right? Yes. I can do this up to 15 times in a room with senior registrars, psychiatrists, and family members, and that's the one that almost always gets left out. You want me to help you with that. Why do we leave that out?
Because you don't want to take responsibility.
Who the heck wants to? He asked me. Here's how I reflected it back. Let me do it one more time and tell me if this makes you uncomfortable. Let me see if I understand you. You're not mentally ill. You don't need these damn medicines. You want me to help you with those people who are trying to kill you. I can leave out the toilet. It's not a big deal. The big deal was he was being killed. Nobody believed him. They wanted to shove medicine down his throat. He wanted me to help him. Anyone uncomfortable with that? Yes. Why? I was too for years. And
Because it's sort of like going into the spider's web.
I'm going into the spider's web.
Like it's all that intrigue. You're stepping into that.
Okay.
You know, I'm going to help you with the people that are going to kill
I'm going to help you with the people who are going to kill you. And in fact, I couldn't help him. I had to say no to that. And now I have to say no to him. Why else? What else makes you uncomfortable about that? Yes?
Feel inauthentic?
It feels inauthentic, like I'm lying, right? I'm not lying. I didn't say I believed any of it. Listen, if I understand you, you're not mentally ill, you don't need the medicine, you'd like me to help you with the people who are trying to kill you. Is that right? I didn't say anything untruthful about my opinion, did I? Not yet. I'm never going to. I worked with a police officer from Indiana doing a LEAP training, and he said, yeah, I do reflective listening, I'm very effective. And he talked about a guy who said that the aliens were beaming thoughts into his head, and he said, yeah, I reflected it back to him, and I said, you know, I've got the same problem with them. Why don't you come with me and we'll talk to a doctor that helped me. So he lied. And everybody kind of laughed, and I said, was that reflective listening? He said, yeah, I think so. I said, do you believe it? He said, no, of course I don't. But I was reflecting back what he said. And then I said, well, did it work? He said, yeah, I got him to the hospital. And then, because I know something about police work with mentally ill people, I knew that he would have encountered this guy again, unless he died from suicide. And he didn't. And I said, so what happened the next time you saw him? And you could just see the light bulb go off. And he said, he ran. Why did he run? You found out eventually, didn't you? And he said, yeah, no, we tackled him. We had to do the regular thing we do. He said, I'm never going to trust you again because you lied to me. You never lie when you're using LEAP. You don't pretend you believe the delusion. You don't pretend you believe the person's not ill if you think they're ill. Right? So to summarize, because we are very close to the end of our time, we listen to delusions if the person's delusional because, in Joyce's case, that's the set of beliefs that are keeping her separated from everyone who wants to help her and are going to isolate her more and more. We also listen to the beliefs surrounding anosognosia. I'm not sick, I don't need medicine, and reflect it back. So you're not sick, you don't need the damn medicines. And we listen to what the person wants. You'd like me to help you with those people who are trying to kill you? Is that right? So Joyce, if I understand you correctly, you don't want to be here, this is court ordered, is that right? And you'd like me to help you figure out what happened, how your husband was taken from you. Okay. Well, that's something we can talk about. Whoa. You should be getting nervous. I know I would have back in the late 80s, early 90s. I do want to help her with this. I don't want to help her with, I might not mislead her to say I'm going to help her get her husband, but I'm going to help her by wanting to talk about this. What's my goal? I want her to feel respected, that she can trust that I'll listen to her and respect her, not judge her. And I do not rush to give my opinion. I'm hesitant to give my opinion. We resist. Wow, that's never happened. Anybody see anything happen, or it just all went black? Well, the absolute best slides are coming. I'm trying to do that. All right, well, we're going to have to do it without it. That's okay. I have a really nifty slide that lists exactly the things that you said. You can play with it, sure, thanks. That we resist reflecting back things like this because we're afraid we're going to make it worse. I hear that when we're colluding with the delusion. We're reinforcing the delusion. By definition, delusions are fixed false beliefs. You cannot make someone delusional or more delusional. You can end up in a situation where the person thinks that maybe you agree with them. I don't have a problem with that so long as they don't feel betrayed later when they hear the truth, that I don't necessarily agree with them. So, among the other resistances we have, and if you come tomorrow we'll have this fixed and you'll see what I was going to talk to you about, is that we don't want to be dishonest, and we've talked about that. So that's simple. Just don't lie. Don't say you believe something you don't. We also fear we'll betray the person, because if the person makes the mistake, if Joyce, by my talking to her and saying, so you would like help with your husband, and you don't like taking these medicines and you'd like to get off of them, is that right? You'd like my help with that? I'd be absolutely willing to talk to you about that and see if I could help you with that. Sure. That's not a lie. And later she asked me, what do you think? And I say, Joyce, I'm sorry, and I could be wrong, but I think you ought to stay on the medicine a little bit longer, and here's why. Right? I don't want to have, quote, led her on to the point where she's going to feel betrayed and angry. Right? And that's about feeling the temperature of the interaction and making sure that I am being honest and coming from a place of genuine compassion for how lonely she is and how she has no one to talk to about this stuff. And for those of you who are thinking, how can I do this with somebody who I've been arguing with for 5 years? You can say, I would like to try to do something different. I've been arguing with you for 5 years, and I've never really listened to your point of view, and I'm sorry. Right? So when somebody asks me, and this is the other reason we resist reflective listening, we don't want to be asked, so what do you think? Do you think I'm mentally ill? We don't want to be asked that. Why? Because when we tell the person what we think, it's going to injure them. It's going to cause pain. It's going to perhaps lead them to feel betrayed, right? So what do you do when someone asks you those difficult questions? Delay answering. Right? And delay answering in a very specific way. It's another one of the tools that we teach. Communication strategies. So if you had asked me, so do you think I'm really married? I would say, I promise I'll answer your question. Honor the question. If it's okay with you, could we talk a little bit more about how we can keep you out of the hospital? Would that be okay with you? So there's 3 elements to that. One is I promise to answer the question and I keep the promise, so I'm not evading it. 2 is I try to move her away from that discussion. Because I am going to tell her I don't think you're married. Because that's a delusion. And the 3rd element is what? Anyone catch it? I know it's late. We're almost done. I asked for permission. Would it be okay with you if we come back to this later? Locus of control, back to her, not to me. How many women in the room have had babies? Can you raise your hands? How many got? Quite a few. That guy raised his hand. Why was that? Oh, no. The woman behind you raised her hand. That was weird. That's not a canned joke, actually. I actually thought you raised your hand. How many of you got free advice from complete strangers on the street that bothered you? All over the world, I ask this question, get the same response. Anyone ever feel patronized? Yes? What else? It was intrusive? Yeah? Angry? People touching you? Common experience. And yet each one of you probably had a woman, a sister, a mother, an aunt, a grandmother, whose advice you asked for about your pregnancy. Is that right? Right? Did you rush home and follow the advice of the complete stranger on the street? No. Did you consider the advice of the loved one whose advice you asked for? At least consider it, if not follow it. Yeah. What are the differences? 2 things. In the latter situation, you had a relationship, and what else? You were in control. You asked for the advice. And that's who you want to be. When you're using LEAP, you listen to the person, you understand their perspective, you understand what matters to them, you reflect back your understanding, that you don't judge them, that you respect them. You normalize it. Joyce, if I were you, I'd be so furious. So do you believe me, Dr. Amador? I promise I'll answer you. I'll get there. But can we talk a little bit more about this housing situation they offered you? Because it sounds like when you go back to your husband's house, and I might even say that, your husband's house. Well, do you believe I have a husband, you get arrested, right? Every time. Can we talk about that first? Would that be okay with you? Might I be able to get her off the dangerous question, which is, do you believe I'm married? But eventually you do want to give your opinion. I don't necessarily want to give my opinion about those kinds of things. I want to give my opinion about what? Treatment. So do you think I should take the medicine? I promise I'll answer that question later, but can we talk first about blah, 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 blah? Would that be okay? Yes. Take your time giving your opinion about the medicine, even if you've given it 1,000,000 times before. And you can even say, this is my favorite one on the slide that you're not seeing, I promise I'll answer your question. If it's all right, could we talk a little bit more about, and then whatever the person has been talking about, the fact that you want to get a boyfriend, that you want to have a boyfriend again. Can we talk about that a little bit? What have you been doing towards that? Would that be okay with you? I'm sorry, that's not my favorite. My favorite is this one. Do you think I should take the medicine? Right? I promise I'll tell you what I think. But I want you to know something. Your opinion about taking the medicine is far more important than my opinion. Would it be okay if we talked about that later? I asked permission. Who disagrees with that? Any medical doctors here think that your opinion about the treatment your patient, you believe your patient should be on, is more important than your patient's opinion about it? It's okay, I'm not going to attack you or disagree vehemently. I had a patient I was discharging from the hospital, and we were talking about this, and I said at one point, because he had a prescription, he had an appointment to see me Tuesday in the clinic, and I said, so do you think you're going to take the medicine? He said, oh yeah, absolutely. He wanted to get out. It was an involuntary hospitalization. And I asked him, can I tell you what I think? I don't want to just tell him what I think. Can I tell you? He said, yeah, sure. Sure, doc, go ahead. I said, listen to the way I said this. If I were you, I wouldn't take the medicine. And he looked at me, what do you mean? Because I had been telling him I thought he should take the medicine, right? If I were you, I wouldn't take the medicine. It's the last thing I would do. No, I'm going to take it. And I said, no, I don't think you understand me. Look, you're not ill. I've been listening to you the whole time you've been here. You're not ill, right? And he was really confused by this at first. But I said, you've told me over and over again you're certain you're not ill. Isn't that true? Well, yes. Then why would you take the medicine? He eventually admitted to me he had no plans to take the medicine, but agreed to come to our appointment on Tuesday. Which I don't know if he would have come to that. And if he did come to that, he would have come to that with what? A pocket full of lies. Yeah, I took my medicine over the weekend. So you see how this is a very different kind of communication. It's really respecting. And what I said to him at one point was, because he said, well, you're the doctor. And I said, yeah, but this is your life. And I'm only the doctor. I'm only your doctor if you think I am. And right now, it doesn't sound like you think I'm your doctor. I think you think I'm a nice guy. He said, yeah, I think you are. Okay, well, we can start there. Let's meet one nice guy with another nice guy on Tuesday. I'm not your doctor. You're not mentally ill, right? These are just some brief snippets of how it sounds, right? When you give your opinion, I'm going to end there. And I haven't gotten through all 7 of the strategies. But that cobweb, that spider web you were talking about, I wanted to just address. You can really do this if you have the tools you need to practice. You won't be able to do it from this talk. But you've got the idea, right? When you give your opinion, use the 3 A's. Apologize for your opinion, because it's hurtful. Acknowledge your fallibility, you could be wrong, and agree to disagree. Joyce, you've been asking me if you should take this medicine. Let's put aside the question of your husband for a minute. Would that be okay? Can we agree to that for a second? In terms of the medication, I'm really sorry, and I could be wrong. I think it would help you. At the very least, it'll keep your family from pressuring you. And it might even help you in some other ways. and I hope we don't have to argue about this. I really respect what you're telling me. Sometimes I don't even try to say point of view. I really respect what you're saying. You don't need it. But since you've asked me, I think you ought to try it. 6 weeks, and let's talk about it and see if it's helped you in any way. You see how the 3 A's are very respectful? I'm really sorry, I could be wrong, but I don't know that there is an alien transmitter in your brain. I don't, it's hard for me to really believe that and understand that. And I don't want to be one of those people that argues with you about it. I'd much rather talk about the things that you've been telling me you would like to accomplish. So I've talked a little bit about reflective listening. I skipped over empathy because we all know how to do that. Delay giving your opinion. When you give your opinion, you give it with the 3 A's, which are designed to communicate what? Respect. Genuine respect. Right? So I'm going to stop there. Because I think, I'm not that late actually. I'm only a few minutes late. But I'll just summarize that with the listen, empathize, agree, partner approach. Did I define agree? Agree means look for common ground. Joyce and I will never agree that she's mentally ill or that she's married. What we will agree on are things like staying out of jail, getting maybe meaningful work or activity, staying out of the hospital, right? We'll definitely, those are things we can agree on and partner on and work on together. And I can link those things to treatment. Can I give you my opinion about what you can do about all the anxiety and sleep problems you've been having? Sure. Why don't you try the medication? Well, that's for schizophrenia. You know, it's not only for schizophrenia, it's also for sleep. So that I'm giving you just examples off the top of my head of ways in which using this kind of approach, you join with the person where she is at, not where I think she should be. And that's how we win on the strength of the relationship we have, rather than any argument I'm making. Right? So I'll stop there, and do we have a few minutes for questions? I forgot the schedule. Well, it's midnight for me, so I've forgotten everything. I think we have a few minutes for questions or comments about this. But let me just say that one final word about LEAP. This really grew out of listening a lot. And if you do nothing else after tonight, just start listening. And if someone says to you, you sound like a parrot or you sound like a therapist, if you're a family member, just say, you know what, I am doing things differently and I'm sorry. I'll try not to repeat everything you say. But I haven't been listening to you. I keep telling you you're sick, you need medicine, you need this, you need that. And I just want our relationship to be better. If you can just do that, I think you'll really be surprised as to not only how quickly things will be better between you and the person you're trying to help, but also how much more open they'll be to your opinion. No, I'm not mentally ill, Javi, but I take the medicine because, you, mom and pops think I should take it. I mean, that's wild. My brother took injections for almost 18 years, and not because he had schizophrenia, because people he cared about and felt respected by thought he should do it. That's not unique. There's no wow about that. It's actually common sense. Who do we go out of our way for? Who do we do things that are difficult for? People we love, people we feel respect us and like us and care about us. And if you're a therapist, liking and respecting, sometimes our patients feel loved. It's a kind of love in a way, with strict professional boundaries, of course. So let's take some questions, and thank you for your attention. I know that it's a little bit late in the evening. If we have questions. Or comments, or disagreements. If you think this wouldn't possibly work in your situation, I'm really interested in hearing those comments.
I had the experience, I didn't know how to handle my son was having delusions, and we were in shopping, and he was telling me that he was getting vibes or cereal boxes where you've been talking to him. I didn't know how to react, but I didn't make any comment. And then when I saw he was getting really anxious, I said, well, maybe we should just go. And but I really didn't know whether I handled it right.
So when he was talking about, I'm going to paraphrase because people can't hear you. talking about delusions, and the cereal boxes were talking to him and getting more and more agitated. She didn't know what to do, so she said nothing, which is not a bad strategy, actually. But you said something interesting. You said, I didn't know how to react. Step back. You don't have to react. Right? What you can do instead is become curious. What I teach crisis workers and police officers is put your hands out like this. And especially when somebody's agitated and talking a mile a minute, slow down, slow down, slow down. I'd like to help if I can. If I can. Don't presume you can help. That's arrogant. I'd like to help if I can. You can't help me, so I can't help you. I'm already doing reflective listening. I can't help you. Okay. Can anyone help you? No one can help me, so no one can help you. And you'd be surprised how quickly, oftentimes, more often than not, the person starts to calm down because they're not stuck between their ears, behind enemy lines, I like to call it. They're now looking at someone who's listening, reflecting back. And then you can move to empathy. It must be very frightening what the cereal boxes are saying, yeah. Are you scared? Yeah. Was it frightening, what they were saying? Or making him happy, or you don't know?
I was so worried about my own reaction.
You were worried about your own reactions, right? Yeah, I was too. Hey, I used to lock the door at night when my brother first got ill. I used to be so scared of the bizarre behaviors and stuff, yeah. But if you can step, and it's very hard for family, I find it's especially hard for mothers, and I don't mean to be sexist, but I think because you've been so entrusted with, usually in most families, with the care and the life or death care of your infant, to sort of let go and go with the flow of their psychotic ramblings is really hard. You feel like you should be doing something. And what I'm saying is what you should be doing, what you can be doing, that's different, is learning what the experience is, befriending your son, in a different way. And then saying, let's go to the hospital because you sound really frightened. Maybe we can get some help there with what the cereal boxes are saying to you. Do you think they're really talking to me, son? I don't know, but I know you're scared. Now you can move to empathy and work in the empathy tool, empathy realm. Yeah. Was there another? Yeah.
Do you think movies or novels make it worse, where they show the main character as being the only sane one and everyone else has a different belief and they're the only ones with the truth and they have to save the world or prove it to everybody else? Does that sort of reinforce for people who have delusions that maybe they are the same ones and everyone else is, or they already think that? Sorry.
No, because did everybody hear the question about whether movies where, sorry, I just had to make sure the babysitter wasn't calling. Good. Had an anxious moment. Talking about your son got me anxious about my son because he eats cereal every morning. It's amazing the way the mind jumps around. As far as I know, his cereal box does not talk to him, but there are certain movies, like the Jodie Foster movie, where she gets on the plane and her child disappears, and does that make people's delusions worse? No. Look, the fact is, with the internet nowadays, you can find 100 to 10,000 people who believe what you believe when you're delusional. I've been facing that in my practice. I don't know if other people have faced that. It's just a non-issue. A delusion, by definition, is a fixed false belief. It doesn't grow out of watching a movie. And the only reason people say, well, that movie, it happened to that person, so why couldn't it be happening to me? You know what I would say to that? Is, I see your point. Because if it happened to that person, it could be happening to you. I see your point. Well, do you think it's happening? Hey, I promise I'll tell you. I swear I will. But tell me more about why you're so upset. Whatever the person has talked about that's meaningful to them. You got to be listening to know how to divert them. And I don't divert and delay forever. I only do it long enough so the person feels like they've done what? They've asked me for my opinion several times. Who do they have to blame for hearing an opinion they didn't want to hear after they've asked several times? They're not going to blame me because I'm actually genuinely reluctant to give it. Part of me is eager to give it because I want them to know, but they already know what I think. I want to display that their opinion's more important than mine through my behavior. I want to show them. So no, I think those movies it's a non-issue. In fact, you can use it. You can use it. Join that person's experience. Yeah.
fair to suggest that it's just a movie?
That's reality testing. It's fair. Anything is fair. You can say it's just a movie, sure. But what's the message? Joyce says to me, I saw a movie where there was a conspiracy and they took her husband away from her. And I say to you, well, yeah, but Joyce, that was just a movie. How would that make you feel?
Not very good.
Not very good.
Yeah, belittled.
How would that make Joyce feel? What do you think?
Not good.
Not good. Fill it in a little bit more. Since you asked the question, I want to...
Sure.
You watched the movie, you saw this movie where they took this woman's husband away?
No, I haven't seen that. But I'm trusting that she knows that movies are created, that they're not necessarily reality.
Mm-hmm. You're trusting that she knows that movies are created and not necessarily reality. Let me cut to what I think is the heart of the matter, and you tell me if I'm right, okay? You're looking for yet another kinder, gentler way of showing her that she's delusional. Does that sound right or no? Am I putting words in your mouth?
Not for me. I personally, to me, it's just a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
Movies are stories, can be made up.
Right. But that movie, that woman had the same experience I had, Dad. Exact same experience. So it can happen. And if the response is, well, it's just a movie, is that taking me... I always think of it this way in my communications. I think of a meter. The meter is either pointing towards increased trust and respect, or it's pointing towards they think I'm crazy and I don't trust them and they don't respect me. So, movie. That's just a movie. I think that moves you towards that person doesn't respect me and they think I'm crazy. Versus, so that movie, the same thing that's happening to you happened in that movie? Yeah, that's right. Sure. Okay, I think we have time for one last. Yes?
A question about irrational behavior versus delusional. All the examples you've given tonight are more about people having spaceships or people trying to kill them. What about just irrational behavior or just that anxiety and fear? How do you distinguish or know or understand it? Is schizophrenia or is bipolar?
I don't think it matters if it's delusion versus irrational behavior, agitation, whatever. If your goal, and this is sort of hypothetical, it's sort of, I'm not sure if there's a specific example you're thinking of, is there?
Well, not really.
You don't have to be personal, I'm just saying, can you flesh it out a little bit? Like,
Well, how much more information do you want? I mean, if someone reacts incorrectly in a certain situation, then they would overreacting. Or how do you know when it's, is that schizophrenia or not?
mm-hmm.
Things like that.
Well, to understand if it's schizophrenia or not, you really need a lot of information. You really need to ask about the beliefs, about other symptoms. Are they seeing, hearing, feeling things that aren't there, hallucinations? Are there negative symptoms, and so on? But if you're asking me, can the kinds of approaches I've been describing tonight be applied in other difficult relationships, including an agitated employee who's acting irrationally? Absolutely, why not? And we do it all the time. Slow down. I want to understand something. So you used a very, and I'm not picking on you, I'm just picking on language. Someone responds in an incorrect way. That's an absolute statement about what's correct and what's not. Now the truth is, you could probably find 355 million people who would agree with you, and that other person could find, thanks to Google, 300,000 people that agree with them that it was correct. It's the worst thing that couples do all the time. Well, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so agrees with me that you were wrong. That's why my other book's called I'm Right, You're Wrong. Now what? So there is, and that's why I showed that little movie. Perception is what matters, not reality. So join the person in their perception. Understand why they're agitated, why they're irrational, what's going on. I'm not saying be a doormat. I mean, if there's things you have to do and interventions you have to make, do it. Make them.
I mean, the delusion doesn't necessarily have to go as far as you explain. What I'm sort of saying is that they might not believe someone's trying to kill them, but they might have a fear about something, the world ending. You know, this whole
Sure.
people who have those fears.
Sure. What's your goal? If your goal is to change their mind that in 2012 the Mayan calendar is correct, okay, but that wouldn't be a leap approach. If your goal is to help this person who can't stop talking about it and it's affecting their work or their relationships, if your goal is to help them stop talking about it so much, then you could use LEAP. So let me understand. So in 2012, this Mayan calendar has shown that the world's going to end. Yeah. Is there anything you can do about it? No. Well, what do you want to do today to get through today, given what you're telling me? Well, do you believe me? I'll tell you what I think if you really want to know. But what's important is you're telling me the world's going to end this year. So what do you want to do with today? And someone who's very irrational, whether it's schizophrenia or personality or whatever, might say, well, I got to do the grocery shopping today, you know, or whatever. I mean, that's just a way you can diffuse, distract, and get the person to work on things that need to be worked on, including things like hopefully getting into treatment if they do have a serious mental illness. Thank you very much for your attention and for your questions, and for the volunteers, a big round of applause. Thank you. Joyce, especially. Call your husband. Thank you. And I think I'm turning the microphone over to Gary. Thank you.
So just before I thank Dr. Amador, we're going to do the draw for the free signed book, the door prize that we have. If you could just make the draw, Dr. Amador.
Oh, I get the draw.
You get the draw.
Hold on.
Hal, you won.
I'll make sure he gets it.
So I just want to take this opportunity, Dr. Amador, to thank you on behalf of everyone here and BCSS Powell River Branch. We got a small token of our appreciation to thank you for being with us on this 2-year journey between when we
meeting for lunch, right?
Colleagues and wanted to get together with you to today. It's been a long journey, but you've been with us every step, and thank you for coming.
Thanks for asking me. Good to see you again, too.
You too.
I didn't see you there before. I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you. Whoa. It's beautiful.
It's handmade in Powell
Oh my
River, so we wanted to
God.
give you something intrinsically Powell River.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anything in it?
No, it's hand painted inside too.
Wow. No, it's really beautiful. This is awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to need your help getting it home, though.
Actually, I will take it from you and get it packed for shipping.
Would you? That's
Yes.
awesome. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you.